6:45 coming up towards 6:46 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, given their exactitude when it comes to time, it must be particularly galling for the authorities with the Tokyo Olympic Games to have the 2020 Games a year late. Of course, no control over that because of the pandemic. But the Games are finally here, for better or for worse. Competition has already begun in a number of sports. We talked about the US women having their unbeaten record. That's their football team. Their unbeaten record ended by Sweden yesterday. But Team TTO is in action this evening from 8:40. Felice Aisha Chow will compete in the rowing competition in the women's singles sculls opening heats. And to just give us some context of the atmosphere, the environment ahead of the Olympic Games, we're joined by the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, Brian Lewis, where it's now, 6:46 in the evening, his time in Tokyo. He's looking across to check on his clock. Hopefully that time is correct as well. And I'm just reminded by Dougie, the cameraman, to tell you konnichiwa, which is probably the better greeting to give you this evening, your time, Brian. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. It's actually 7:48 p.m. here in Tokyo. So good evening here in Tokyo. Good morning there in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, I've been here. This is going to the second day. We have to fully quarantine because of the very stringent COVID-19 countermeasures. 2 PCR tests daily, antigen saliva tests every day. I'm missing home already, man. Trinidad and Tobago, I miss you. I love you, man. This is not easy out here, man.
Well, I like the little accent as well that you're bringing towards the end here, but
it's not easy, man. It's not easy, man. It's not easy.
And put that in context for us.
Out here.
Yeah,
it's very intense, man.
Put that in context for us, because again, we have to be mindful of all of the challenges associated with these games. And before we even talk about the competition and the athletes operating in this environment, and you would be aware of all the dialogue. The majority of people polled in Tokyo, they don't want the games. People saying call it off. Some of but the reality is, with the billions that have been expended on it, not just the advertisers and the money around and the IOC, it really is something that you, for better or for worse, you have to go through with the games, don't you?
Yeah, that's the attitude of the Japan government and the Tokyo metropolitan government. But, being here for 2 days, it has strengthened my view that this, for the Japan government and the Tokyo metropolitan government, it's more than the Olympic Games. It's also to do with their huge bet on their hydrogen strategy and their strategy to make Japan a carbon neutral, zero emission society by the year 2050. In 2017, they outlined a national strategy for hydrogen. In the village, they're using Toyota vehicles, the Mira and the Sora that is driven by fuel cell hydrogen technology, cardboard beds, recycled hydrogen driven for electricity. It's a massive investment in their hydrogen strategy. And, when I started to look at that from that aspect, it started to make sense why they were so determined, because this is about them betting on their future in terms of hydrogen and fuel cell technology.
And as far, Brian, as the Olympic movement itself, and with all that has been experienced with these games and the many challenges, I mean, we just heard yesterday that Brisbane has gotten the games for 2032, and I was just thinking back on Montreal 1976, and I'm sure you recall the financial fiasco that was Montreal 1976. Is this entire experience, because as president of the TTOC, you would be part of the Olympic movement and the IOC and all of that. Is that changing?
Not at a big level, though, but I got what you're saying here.
Yeah, I know that. I understand you're not part of the executive, but you have a say.
No, it's a club.
But is this in any way impacting on how the IOC views Olympic Games? Is it just this mega event with mega sponsors and so on? Is there something more to it now than the Olympic Games as we know it?
Well, the International Olympic Committee believe obviously they believe in what they believe in. I mean, the fact is that you already have 2024 Paris lined up, 2028 LA, Los Angeles, and now 2032. If you look at that in the context of those countries, one is France, Europe, the other is USA, Los Angeles, and then Australia, which is itself um, positioning itself for hydrogen technology. You can see that the footprint on this, it, it's 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 much more than people look at it. It reinforces Nelson Mandela's utterance that sport is a powerful tool. But what has happened now, from my perspective, is that it's very clear now that the balance, so to speak, have shifted into the Olympic movement becoming more about the global sport industry and the reality of that money drives that and it's just an evolution. It's an evolution, of course, that they straddle, so that those of us who may consider ourselves purists, who still in this thing for volunteer, no per diem, no stipend, no salaries. It's a bit of a compromise. There are some contradictions that we have to wrestle with, obviously. But that's the reality. In the context, though, of Tokyo 2020, again, having left and stepped out of our little bubble there in Trinidad and Tobago, where there's a lot of fear driving things. And you embrace now the global realities of disruptive thinking and the disruption that COVID-19 has brought, and how the big wide world out there, whether cynically or otherwise or pragmatically, they're starting to move on. It has been a revelation in the context of the technology. Everything is apps. Here in Tokyo, they're monitoring everything you do by apps. You have to download apps. You have to literally take personal responsibility. You have to do your own testing, the saliva test. The only time we are allowed to leave the room for the first 3 days is to go to the collection site. And there's a thing here where you wait on the dreaded ping on your phone. Once you get that ping, it means that they're coming for you. Or they knock on the door, they will take you to an isolation site. And, it's as I said, it has caused us, at least from the perspective of Team TTO, to really focus on the now and what's in front of us, because there is a lot of distraction, but you have to really focus on what you can control, as we seek to make it as safe and secure for the athletes. Because at the end of the day, the mental and emotional pressure in just having to meet all the countermeasures, etc., is incredibly challenging and difficult for each and every athlete here. But our focus is Team TTO.
And how do you think, Brian, that is going to impact on the performance of our athletes? Because we know Felisa Chow goes into action in rowing, which will be, I think, around 9:40 in the morning, your time, tomorrow. How much is this entire experience, do you think, going to impact on their ability to give of their best?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see, because the athletes so far, we have about 8 athletes, rowing, sailing, Tennille Campbell, Aaron Prince, the boxer, judoka, Gabrielle Wood. They are all very focused. In fact, for the opening ceremony, you had Dylan Carter and Aaron Prince opting not to participate because their events are imminent. They're very focused. And, it shows that our athletes at the elite level, they are understanding the reality of what is required. I'm really looking forward to seeing, although the chef de mission, Lovey Santana, is in charge of the delegation in the Olympic Village, along with the COVID liaison officer, Risa Grant. It's going to be very interesting to see if that same focus it continues with the track and field contingent coming in from tomorrow here in the village. I know people like Keyshawn Walcott is incredibly and intensely focused. So to answer your question, our athletes appear this time to be very focused. What we have also done, recognizing the mental health challenges. The IOC, I must say, the International Olympic Committee, they have a very intense and deep-seated 24 24/7 mental health platform that is available to the athletes. But from the perspective of Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, we have also engaged, so to speak, on a pro bono basis, Alexandria Olton, sports psychologist, who will be available virtually for any member of the Team TTO delegation that feels they need to talk. And so we are doing everything here. As I said, the COVID-19 countermeasures, it's really an exercise in how to attempt to coexist. I don't think that the IOC and the Tokyo metropolitan government and the Japan government have any illusions that they would not get positive cases. The real issue, and the World Health Organization chief had outlined that a couple of days ago, is to test, trace, isolate, detect, and contain. And I think there are some very important lessons, even for Trinidad and Tobago, as we start to open up our economy and focus on the post-COVID road to recovery.
And Brian, before time runs out on us, and we do appreciate you taking the time, and indeed we look forward to maybe some further interactions as we go along with these games. Just as a final quick word, the whole attitude of protest, and we've talked about this Rule 50 and so on. If, for example, tomorrow, before she steps into her vessel for the rowing that takes place, and she decides to take a knee and put up her right fist and get sanctioned by the IOC, what are you going to do about that?
Well, we have already said we're not going to penalize peaceful protests. And to be fair on the IOC, they have relaxed the rules in their view a little bit, so that, for example, in the first day of competition, there were athletes and teams taking the knee. But what had happened initially, there appeared to have been an instruction to the IOC social media in Tokyo 2020 social media platform not to show the photograph. Because of course, negative comment, they have relented on that. So you can take peaceful action, but it's just that they have narrowed it down now to you can't do it on the field of play during the event or on the victory during the victory ceremony, so that athletes have been peacefully protesting within the leeway that the IOC have now given them before your event in certain parts. So,
but Brian, if I can intervene very quickly before we get to the top of the hour and go to the news, isn't that defeating the purpose of protest? If you're putting me to protest in a little closet where nobody could see, isn't the idea of protest is to make a mark at the actual point where you're going to get the attention, even if it causes trouble?
I think so. I think that Rule 50 is a legacy of Avery Brundage, and where you would see that people are being, like the director of the opening ceremonies, etc., have been forced to resign because of past history. I think that the reality of Avery Brundage's legacy and Rule 50 and the banning of life ban on Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett needs to be addressed, because you can't, while no one is asking the IOC to rewrite history, they need to face up and reconcile the history of Avery Brundage and Rule 50. So, that's going to be an issue that's not going to go away during this games, on top of everything to do with the COVID-19 countermeasures and holding an Olympic Games during a COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. Brian, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, thanks for the corrected time check as well, because it's coming up towards 8 o'clock in the evening, your time. And we do hope all is safe and all is well with you, with the rest of the contingent, the athletes as well. And we'll keep in touch and no doubt look forward to some good performances from our Trinidad and Tobago competitors. Thank you very much once again for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Brian Lewis, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, in quarantine in Tokyo, serving that period of quarantine as well, before he's able to allowed to move around in the games environment, with the competition getting underway. The formal opening ceremony will be tonight as well. It's 7 o'clock on the dot, time for the news, and then we move into the second hour of Morning Edition.